The architect of the biggest massacre perpetrated against Jews since the Holocaust, Yahya Sinwar, is dead at a time when Israel is commemorating a year since October 7th. What does this mean for Israel, for the war in Gaza, for the hostages? This is a special and holy update. I'm Yonit Levy of Channel 12.
And I'm Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian in London.
And with us to discuss this massive event is Shimrit Meir. She's an expert analyst of the Arab world, an expert on Yahya Sinwar himself. In the past, a senior diplomatic advisor for former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Shimrit, thank you for talking to us. We seem to be talking when there is good news. Last time we talked was 3 weeks ago when Nasrallah was killed. Is there a difference between the two in the fact that this was actually by accident?
First, thank you for having me. It looks like my new personality, just arriving whenever there are good news. That's an interesting, twist in the plot of my career. But I think a very good day, needless to say. This is how President Biden described it. Good day for Israel, for the U.S., for humanity, and maybe eventually, even though, this was not the main purpose, maybe eventually to the people of Gaza as well. But it'll take some time to leverage this event, which is a huge one, even though a bit anticlimactic in the way it was done, and also by chance. And also, it's kind of like a horror movie when the evil villain is terrorizing everyone, and after he destroyed half the world, then he's taken out. It took a lot of time, unfortunately, to get rid of him. Years and years. We should have and could have done it before October 7th, but eventually it happened. So very good day, and hopefully this will lead to a string of events that will allow a good solution for the hostages and even a good end to this war.
So that's the thing I wanted to ask you about, because immediately that was the hopeful conclusion a lot of people jumped to. Does this mean that Netanyahu can now declare victory and end this war? And I say that partly because when people used to wonder, what does this slogan mean, total victory? What will be the thing that Netanyahu has to have in order for him to say, okay, that's it, we've done it? They always used to cite the death of Yahya Sinwar. That was the sort of benchmark. Now we're here at this point. Do you actually foresee the Prime Minister doing that? Or do you think, again, as a lot of us were wondering, he doesn't really want this thing to end, and so he'll find other excuses? How do you read it?
So reading his statement from tonight, he's, I think rightly so, wants to focus now on the hostages. And maybe there is some kind of opening now, and there is some kind of opening now to achieve what we couldn't achieve in the past because of Yahya Sinwar's stand that was very, very harsh. Yahya Sinwar did not want to end this war. He was hoping that other parties will join from the north, from everywhere, the entire kind of army of Iranian proxies. And he was not willing to make a big deal or even a small deal or partial deal. So the question is, what is going to happen now? And I hear the Americans saying that they are going to push for a new deal or to renew their efforts to release the prisoners. It's about the prisoners now. And I think this is a good time to, sorry for using this term, think outside of the box. Because at the moment, there is a void in Hamas's leadership. There is the leadership, what's left of it, in Qatar, in Doha. And there is Sinwar's brother, Muhammad Sinwar, who is still on the ground in Gaza, but he's not his brother. Still, he has some control. He is at odds with another person, Azadin Haddad, I don't want to get into the names, but Sinwar was a symbol. He was the de facto leader of the Palestinian national movement. He was the kind of leader that you see once in a generation. The fact that he's gone allows for kind of reshuffle of the cards. The people that are holding the hostages at the moment, and the hostages are an asset and a liability because you are a target and you are exposed. They should know that if they are going to do the right thing and hand them over, they will be generously compensated, whatever that means, whether it's money, immunity for them and their big families, whether it's relocation, to use this word, or other things. In order for them to believe that, you need to have someone who will guarantee it that they trust. Because needless to say, they don't trust Israel, they don't trust the US, they don't even trust other players like the Egyptians. This is where the Qataris can enter the picture. Israel can work with the Americans and give them enough, maybe meat to give to the Qataris to make this, worthwhile for them as well. So I think many things can happen now, and hopefully, there will be a fast movement in this direction, because to answer your question, and Jonathan, the next move is and should be about the hostages.
Yeah, and we should say that at the beginning, many of the hostages' families, when the news came out, were quite worried because they thought he was surrounded by hostages and maybe that hurt him. But as you said, this was kind of an anticlimactic moment because he was shot with other terrorists sort of by accident. The Israeli forces that were there kind of found out after looking at the bodies that it's probably Sinwar. Let's maybe rewind and remind people of who this man is. We know he's a butcher. We know he's a psychopath. There were, these stories about him murdering people, Palestinian collaborators with Israel, with his bare hands, if I'm not mistaken. This is an enemy of Israel who knew us Israelis only tragically too well. Let's talk about who this man was.
Yeah, he was originally from Khan Yunis, hence his nickname, the Butcher from Khan Yunis. And he had a tendency for very graphic violence. The fact that he found himself in Israeli prison, by the way, it's not because he killed Jews, it's because he killed Arabs, collaborators. This was his obsession until the end, collaborators. He was very careful, which by the way, kind of explains the fact that he managed to sustain and survive for so long. So even during this war, Sinwar was the kind of, always made me wonder, following him closely, especially his public appearances, his speeches. I didn't get how he managed to get people to support him. He was not an attractive person by any means. And I'm not just referring to his physical, exterior appearances, etc., etc., etc. The way he talked, lack of kind of any sense of human connection. I remember after the operation, the war in the spring of 21, he was given a speech holding a little hand as kind of a little child as a human shield. He was shouting. I remember live tweeting it and constantly complaining about why is he shouting. And he was so not appealing, but So not the charismatic
Nasrallah, for example.
Not the charismatic Nasrallah, not someone who you would say, this is my national leader. And he was indeed the Palestinian national leader. There is an iconic photo of him sitting on a chair in the middle of the ruins in Gaza. You kind of got the picture of who this guy is. He's not afraid of sacrifice. He's not afraid of brutal violence. He's not afraid of destruction. And he sees himself as an important link in the long journey to liberate Palestine. I was waiting, still am waiting, after October 7th, for Palestinians to say he does not represent me. I didn't hear many voices that said this, not even today.
In that context, the circumstances of his killing and what that will do for the sort of legend of him afterwards, because I take your point completely about his really seriously significant status in the history of the Palestine National Movement. I think that's interesting. So he was killed above ground in a gunfight, directly involved in direct combat with Israeli forces, rather than, as I think a lot of people expected, underground in a tunnel hiding. Does that not sort of burnish his legend now that he wasn't, I'm thinking from the point of view of the movement he led, not cowering away and hiding, but actually involved in the battle? Does that make him, the legend will grow? That's one question. And then the fact that he was involved in direct fight like that, what does that tell us about Hamas? When the leader of the movement is actually involved in a sort of shootout from a house, does that suggest they have kind of run out of road? Because if this was a big army, he would be directing forces. He wouldn't be almost like a scene out of a movie with his last, pistol in his hand with the last few bullets, which is what this looks like.
I think two very good questions. To your first question, whenever the pictures came out, I texted to a friend asking, did you release these photos or is it AI? Because there was some kind of attempt by Hamas and others to say these are not real, these are fake, this is deep fake, etc., etc. But I identified, I'm sorry to say it, and I'm sorry that this is my life, but I kind of identified the dental pattern in his mouth, and it looked like Sinwar to me. So I thought, if this is an AI, this is very good AI. So he said, no, we released this photo. Photos are real. And I think that this was a very calculated move by Israel to release this photo. First of all, to make sure everyone in Gaza and in Hamas understand that he's dead.
Yes.
And second, this is how that looks like. And I think it goes to your second question about, is he the last one standing? It goes to show you that, first of all, the IDF is de facto military control in Gaza and able to move and kind of make them run away and change location and et cetera, et cetera. And second thing, which goes to kind of tell the story of Sinwar himself, he was the kind of represented an alternative way of leadership to Hamas's leaders in Doha, for example, that stay in 7-star hotel and spend time in a gym and drive fancy cars and live like kings.
Right.
He was the epitome of armed struggle, and the people of Gaza are suffering, and he's suffering too, and he's on the ground, and he doesn't bathe, and he looks ragged, etc., etc. So, and of course, armed and fighting, etc. So, to your question, yeah, if among his crowd, I'm sure, and in the ethos of the Palestinian armed struggle, the history, but I do think that others in Gaza that are living with the consequences, and to judge by social media and the kind of the discourse, are much less enthusiastic about the idea of October 7th than they were a year ago. This was a very, let's say, problematic, to put it mildly, week for Israel internationally, and in terms of international pressure in regards to several operations in other parts of the Gaza Strip. But Israel corresponds with two very different audiences. One in Western capitals, and which hear news of humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And the other is in the region, and our necessity to establish deterrence after October 7th, and the kind of present a narrative of this is what happens if you are launching October 7th against Israel. This is how it ends.
It's so interesting what you're saying, that Israel is actually having a two-pronged dialogue with the world. One is with Western countries, one is with the region, and it's a different message that they're sending to each of these conversations. You know, when we talked when Nasrallah was assassinated, this was 3 weeks ago, you said very clearly that there were many people happy not only in Tel Aviv, but in Lebanon and Syria and other places. Are there people happy in Gaza? Are there a lot of people happy in Gaza that Sinwar is dead?
I'm not sure we are going to see what we saw in several parts of the Levant, where people handed out candy, etc., after Nasrallah died. You know, I kind of consume some of the conversation on social media about people that are displaced and suffered terribly in Gaza in the last year. And I'm sure there will be a sign of relief and maybe hope that this will lead to the end of the war, and maybe a relief to their situation. It is telling that there is no vocal, let's say, Palestinian stand that say he was a very bad person and he actually got us in a big, big trouble as a people. You don't see this kind of soul search. You don't see this kind of accountability. Maybe this was wrong. Maybe this wasn't the most brilliant move. Maybe it's time to rethink and reshuffle. Maybe this kind of armed struggle is not leading us to where we want to be. Where do we want to be? This is not happening, at least not in an extensive way as you would have imagined. What did we do wrong? Kind of discourse that you see, for example, in Israel, to, ad nauseum and other places.
Two questions. One is on that side of things, and this is a fear that I'm voicing, that they will want revenge for the killing of Yahya Sinwar, and one of the few ways they have for that is the hostages that they still hold, and whether you think there is some risk now that they will harm or worse the hostages they hold as a gesture of revenge for the killing of their leader. That's a question about what they do now, the remnant Hamas leadership. And then the other thing, different question, is about the domestic situation and what this does for Netanyahu's standing. The fact that twice now in the space of 3 weeks, the three of us have convened to discuss Israel removing a mortal enemy of Israel, and that those have happened, those successes, in quotes, have happened with Netanyahu in the prime ministerial chair. Does that boost his standing electorally, that he can go to the electorate saying, not I'm the guy on whose watch October 7 happened, not I'm the guy who released Sinwar 13 years ago in a prisoner exchange deal, but rather I'm the guy who killed Nasrallah, I'm the guy who killed Sinwar, re-elect me.
So about the hostages, which is kind of, I share your worry. I do feel that this is why I do believe this is urgent, to convince the people. And when I say urgent, I mean before other people in Hamas will take control and maybe, instruct people to act in various ways. This is the time to convince whoever it is that they are an asset, not a liability. And that this is a new chapter that can lead to a way out to yourself and to your family, and maybe to many people, if you do the right thing. And I think we should be aggressive about this, sending the right messaging. And as I said, I think it would help if we have someone that they trust backing this kind of approach. As for Netanyahu, I don't think that all roads must always lead to Netanyahu, especially since there are no elections in sight. He managed to fortify his government, and the discourse about election is not there.
Although now he might want elections, because he could go in as the guy, the slayer of these two dragons.
So I don't know. Lucky for me, I'm not involved in politics in that sense, and I'm very happy about that anymore. But I would say that this is a complicated road. There are very good days that are kind of climactic. And there are some bad days, and sometimes the good and the bad happen in one day. And, Israel is still struggling in many ways, and it's dealing with, long-term implications of this horrible year, both economically and in terms of international standing. And of course the hostages and the heavy price, first and foremost, of our soldiers, and everything that's going within the society. So it's going to be a very complicated calculation, both the decision to go to an election and if you're a voter, who to vote for.
I recall this article that you wrote. It was May of 21. It was shortly before you became the then Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's chief advisor. And you said that an option of assassinating Sinwar should be on the table, even if the price is a war, an all-out war with Hamas. There were opportunities along the way. And, it's painful to play this game of virtual history, but there were opportunities along the way to assassinate Sinwar that I assume would have prevented the terrible massacre of October 7th. Is there reason to think about that now at all? Or should we, let sleeping dogs lie in that regard?
Well, personally, I think about it every day since October 7th and every night. I was of the opinion after the operation, which was after the war in 21, that was a few weeks before we formed our government. I was of the opinion, and I wrote it in articles and I talked about it a lot, that Sinwar has become so dangerous that he should be taken out, whatever the cost may be. If there will be a war, there will be a war. I have to say that I maintain my position in government as well when it was on the table. It was published, so I can say there were several opportunities throughout several governments to take him out, and it didn't happen.
Why didn't it happen?
And you asked, but because of various reasons, because the meaning was to start a war. And to start a war against Hamas out of the blue, when there is an alleged kind of detente or hudna or what have you, is a big decision.
Yeah.
But having said that, you ask very wisely, Yonit, about what is the takeaway for the future. And I would say that, especially if this war is nearing its end, I would assume that if you are a policymaker in Israel, the pattern of your thinking must change to train your mind to the fact that even if there is a ceasefire, whether it's in the south or in the north, but you are presented with a provocation, with someone who incites violence, like Sinwar did throughout the years, or a provocation like we experienced from Hezbollah in the north, you do not explain to yourself and to your public why it doesn't matter, and you do not appease the enemy, and you do not buy time. You act decisively. And if you act decisively when it is small, it won't grow to a monstrous situation like we've seen both in the south and in the north. And I think that if we are talking about what are going to be the terms of engagement following a ceasefire, both in the south and in the north, it should, one of the parameters must be some kind of freedom of operation to the IDF in case of violation of the other side. And since you can't put this in writing, it should be engraved in the minds of our leaders, both the military and political leaders. Let's say we are withdrawing from Gaza and someone else is taking over. I think it's far-fetched and maybe it will take some time, and someone else is taking over. And the first rocket that is being fired, you have to have a war all over again. I'm exaggerating to make a point. And if you are withdrawing from southern Lebanon, and in a matter of several months, you get Radwan force on your border again, because this is how they do it, little by little. First is, 5 people and then 10 people. And before you know it, you have an entire army ready to invade Israel. You cannot allow it to happen. Not anymore. So I think that's the biggest takeaway from our constant failure to kill not only Sinwar, but the entire Hamas leadership. We had it. We had it in our hands, and we dropped it.
Shimrit, thank you so much for talking to us again today.
Moadim lesimcha, and let's hope for more good news.
Thank you, Shimrit, very much for speaking to us for Unholy.
Thank you.
Really fascinating to hear Shimrit Meir. Extraordinary that we've come to her twice in 3 weeks for these two huge landmark moments in this war. I keep going over in my mind whether or not there is someone on the other side, as it were, who is now able to do this deal that everybody, I think, wants desperately, everybody outside this situation. Is there anyone now who's empowered, who has the authority to sign a hostage release deal? And then I wonder about, on the other side, I have ringing in my ears our conversation, Yonit, with Amit Segal a few weeks back, in which he said the sticking point about a hostage deal in the mind of the Prime Minister Netanyahu isn't the things that everyone thinks it is. It's actually about the release of Palestinian prisoners on the other side because of the precedent of the Gilad Shalit release. He does not want to do that. And a little voice in me thinks, what has changed about that? He still would be reluctant to do that, because it would, as it was explained to us by Amit, it would incentivize future hostage takings and abductions and so on. And so I just wonder whether, although I can feel there's optimism around, that maybe this breakthrough moment leads to a hostage release deal and perhaps a ceasefire deal. Are there people on the other side who can sign it? And is Netanyahu in a different place now than he was a few hours ago, where he wants to do a deal that sees him release Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails? I'm not sure.
Well, I think the thing to take away from the conversation with her is just how urgent it is. That if something can be done, it should be done very quickly. I was struck, first of all, by the fact that she, being this very sort of astute Arab affairs analyst, to say that there are two messages Israel needs to be sending out to the world, and it's a different message. And it's not because Israel is supposed to be, conniving here, but just that the West is hearing one thing and the region is hearing another. And after the severe attack that Israel had on October 7th, it needs to, restore its deterrence. But also that people matter in the way, we always talk about that one man theory in history. Does that one person really matter? When in the case of Yahya Sinwar, his violence, his hatred of Israel, his knowledge and understanding of us led to this tragedy. And if he had been taken out sooner, as she did advise when she was herself a political advisor, and by the way, many others did, head of Shin Bet, Nadav Argaman at the time, and others, we would have seen a different history. I mean, it's a sad thing to deal with now, but that is also the reality.
No, I think it's a really important point. The extent to which October the 7th was his project, his personal mission that he had been speaking of, correct, but he'd been speaking of a day like October 7th, it seems, for years. He had been planning it for years and years. It'd been in his mind, even when he sat in Israeli jails, the idea of the flood, that kind of operation. And in a way, I agree with you and with Shimrit that Absent him, I'm not sure it would have happened. And so his removal is obviously a hugely significant moment. We've interrupted the Sukkot break that Jews are having around the world in order to bring you this update. I think you'll understand why we felt we had to do it. But if you are celebrating, we hope you are able to have a good remaining few days of this festival. And obviously, I think we'll stay in touch with each other, and we'll keep people updated as this thing develops.
We will. See you next time.